Hello everyone and welcome to the second part of the live sessions of the Student Partnership Objective. So last week, as you may have seen, Emmanuel went with the, what did he go with again? So it was all good so well.
Respect.
It was all good so well up until that point. Emmanuel went last week to kick it off, and this week myself and Jo are going with tolerance. Emmanuel went with equality. There we go.
Equality.
So this week we have Jo Tait, who is an academic strategic lead with the engineering school. So Jo, do you want to give yourself a quick introduction, and also what have you been up to in lockdown? Because it's certainly interesting times, isn't it?
It's yes, very interesting times, I have to say. So I'm one of the leads in the School of Engineering. I look after the teaching, learning and student experience of all the students in the school. And usually you only see me if there's a problem, which is bad, because people always, I think they relate me to bad things happening, which is not ideal. But I'm looking at the assessment of students. I look at how the students are taught, what better ways could be done. Looking at essentially all the things that students are going to need to know when they graduate. Are we keeping all of that in the curriculum, that kind of thing? It's kind of a bit boring. I'm actually not an engineer as well, just to put that out there. I'm a geologist, and so I've been working with engineers for about 20 years, and so I've got some engineering habits now, which is sometimes a good thing and sometimes maybe not so much. We can get into that later. Yeah. During lockdown, well, we moved reasonably quickly, and obviously as being the lead for student experience, we're trying our very best to ensure that students were able to continue their learning, because we couldn't just stop, and make sure that the assessments that we gave them were robust and doable, and that kind of thing. But at the same time, I've got two small kids, primary 1 and primary 3, who were also at home, and my husband also working full time. So certainly the first few weeks were fraught and very stressful as we tried to figure out what our new normal was. I don't like the word, but
what's the homeschool routine like?
The homeschool routine. So at the moment, my husband gets up early, and then I look after the kids till 10:30, and sometimes learning happens. And mostly shouting happens. Sometimes people get dressed, that kind of thing. And then I get to go back to my job around about 10:30 till about maybe 2-3 o'clock, and then we swap over again. Mostly it's childminding. Now and again we'll use the materials that the school have given us. But sometimes there's a lot of screen time, and at the moment they get quite a bit of screen time. So we basically take the stuff that we can print off and they can write stuff out on. So they're getting some learning. What's really interesting is that it was in the news, they were saying that some people were spending like 7 hours a day on the homeschool. And I have to say, I felt very bad because we ain't doing that.
The first week is a good push, probably.
Yeah, that's probably about right there, and that's a good week. So yeah, it's hard because I miss my colleagues. I find that really difficult, especially when decisions are needing made that are actually they're very important, and emails can be misconstrued depending on how people write. So that's a good place to start, perhaps, with our tolerance, or to include it somewhere, is how people write isn't always what they mean. So you can definitely take offence quite easily at an email, and it was certainly not meant.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, and we will go through it. But I think everyone's kind of learning on the job here, aren't we? It's
just a bit, yeah, but we'll have to be agile and adaptable and forgiving and kind and
yeah, I think everyone in job interviews this time next year will be smashing it when they go, have you ever had a problem in time?
Exactly. Well, I'm doing a PhD at the moment, and my data collection is now going to include this time of lockdown, which is not helpful at all, really, but I'll have to cover that in my Viva in a year or so's time. But it certainly is interesting and challenging, which is I think it can be very difficult for some people, though. So I think it's trying to be able to manage our own frustrations with being aware that other people are going to have other frustrations that are equally, repeat of the word frustrating there. Yeah. What about yourself? Are you enjoying being locked down? Do you get out much?
So for anyone that doesn't know me, I'm obviously Kieran Matthews, President of Sport and Physical Activity. Probably should have said that at the start. But yeah, it's been weird. I think obviously coming home, I didn't think it would be enjoyable because I've lived on my own for 5 years. But it's actually been all right. And the only slightly concerning thing was the NHS 5K. I thought I'd be able to smash that quite easily. I think I got 4K round and almost collapsed. So
oh wow!
It was a quick realization that 5 years in life it's not great. So lockdowns come just in time, I think. But yeah, I think we'll just get on with the tolerance part of today. So yeah, as Emmanuel did last week, he kind of took us through the equality part, and we'll always refer back to that because there's obviously the 3 sections myself, Ursula and Emmanuel are working on are respect, tolerance and equality, and they obviously kind of intersect and they link all the time. But today we're kind of going to narrow down on the tolerance part and kind of look at gender and age too, more specifically, as part of the student partnership objective that we've been working on this year. So just out of interest, what kind of does tolerance mean to you? How would you kind of define it?
Well, it's kind of funny because engineering has a use for the word tolerance. So the tolerance for me, it's always been the acceptable margin of error, essentially, which kind of works in life as well. So really, for me, it's being able to understand that other people don't share your life experience, your lived experiences, and they will have different opinions to yourself, and you might not agree with them, but you can accept their worldview is different to yours, and we can kind of rub along okay. I think that's kind of my Jo version of it.
Yeah, I think I'd agree, because I think as a student, and all the students that are watching, I should add that if you have any questions as we go through or any opinions, please chip in too, and we'll try and answer them. But I think as a student, it's probably something that you don't even think of as a meaning tolerance. So you kind of just go through life and through university, and you pick up on everyone's beliefs and opinions, but you kind of do it naturally. But when you actually narrow it down and look into what it actually defines it, to me, it's about everyone's going to have background. Everyone comes from different, especially university, and it's kind of understanding where they come from, what their values are, and what their beliefs are. And interestingly, the Cambridge Dictionary meaning isn't too far away from that. So it's the willingness to accept behaviour and beliefs that are different from your own, although you might not agree or approve of them. And I think that last bit is kind of crucial, isn't it? Because
yes,
in everyday life, you might not agree with someone or approve of them, but it's important that we respect them, and most importantly, tolerate their beliefs as well.
Definitely. I think one of the key things in engineering at the moment is, and what's sort of bleeding into diversity here slightly, is that without diverse opinions and diverse experiences in your group, you will only come out with limited answers. So the value of tolerance of other people's views is really high, because if I just have a group of people who all think like me, we're going to come out with a thing that I'll think is fabulous, but perhaps the rest of the world won't want to buy or won't want to use. So that's actually no help to me. So to have a diverse team where people are able to share their views that are perhaps run contrary to your own is actually a better and more valuable place to be. That's my view. That's my view. You might not agree.
Yeah. I think that's where the student partnership and staff work together. And it brings me to that I got in yesterday, actually. And it was, have you had a time where you receive an email maybe at an hour of a day where you're not working, and then students are kind of expecting a response pretty quickly, so it could be a Saturday or a Sunday, and they almost expect you guys to be working. It's kind of an interesting one from my point of view.
Yeah, or two in the morning sometimes. I think it's hard for students in one way because all of us staff all have lives. We're not all the same. So some people will work much better at night time for their own reasons. And for a while, when I was first back from my first kid, I was nursing. So I was up at stupid o'clock in the morning. And frankly, nursing is boring. You don't sit lovingly looking at your child. So quite a lot of the time, you may be checking your emails while you're at it because it's convenient for you at that point. But then the student says, oh, well, Jo answered my email at 3 a.m. Why has Mike not answered my email? And poor Mike is like doing a 9 to 5 because he has his other stuff going on. And so, yeah, it can be difficult. And I think there is certainly recently the staff have been working out of hours and different hours, and it's not always clear when one might get a response. So I have had students complaining to me that, an administrator hasn't replied within a time frame, and then when I look, I said, well, you sent that on Tuesday evening, and she works Tuesday and Friday, so you're not going to get a reply till Friday. But it says that on her out of office, so yeah. Maybe you should read that. But at the same time, we're saying, we're available, email us all the time. And other people are just terrible with email, and that is something we have to look at. But I think the only time that I've had one where they're complaining about my response, and that was a difficult one. We were both, as in the student and myself, were both actually going through a very similar life experience. And he was struggling. And I was struggling, but we hadn't shared that at that point. So I was chasing the student up for a piece of work that they hadn't submitted. And I didn't want them to have to go through all of the huge amount of forms. I was just like, just hand this thing in, we'll get there. I know I've got some tolerance. I've got an acceptable margin here to work with. And he sent this big long rant about how I couldn't possibly understand all the things he was going through. So I wrote him one back. I have to say it was very early days, and I just went back and said, all right, well, this is all the things I'm going through. Please, I'm a human. And eventually we came to an understanding where we were both not tolerating each other's position. I wasn't tolerating that he was late. He wasn't tolerating that I would totally understand his position and try and give him some times. So it can be, email, I think, is a terrible communication tool if it is not used correctly. And I'm guilty of sending awful emails as well, where I think that I've been perfectly clear and actually it looks rude, and I have to come back and look over that again. But yeah, I think it is hard for the students though, because if they're not getting a consistent "this is what we do" thing, then they feel like they're perhaps being let down, when actually what's probably happening is the people who are answering at 3 a.m. should be saying, this is my working hour because I'm actually sleeping from 9 to 1. Yeah. Or, that kind of thing.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? And bringing it back to the tolerance is the fact of, as much as I think the staff then need to understand the fact that students are in their own bubble. I remember it myself. Oh, yeah. You were in the library at 9 p.m. on a Sunday night, and you didn't even think what day. The days just all roll into one.
Absolutely.
It's interesting. And I think it's something that, I know you probably do it, but I think it's something that probably needs to set out kind of at the start, isn't it? So at the start of the year, especially if you're a fresher, because you won't know really when lecturers what they kind of want to do. And I think, as you said, it's that understanding between the staff and the students of what's acceptable and what isn't, and that relates to both the students' tolerance levels and the staff.
Exactly, and I think if we can do that on an individual basis, that would be better for everybody, because I have colleagues who are in Ramadan at the moment, and I was receiving emails from them quite late certainly very early in the morning, and I thought, oh my goodness, your well-being must be terrible because you're working all the hours. And actually they were using that time because that's when they were up anyway, and it was actually better for their well-being to answer the emails at that time and not 11 o'clock in the morning, when that's not a good time for them. So again, it's there's a step forward. In order to tolerate, you need to understand the position in the first place. Even just a little bit, I think it helps. So by knowing that now, I don't go around badgering people for, you shouldn't be up at 4 a.m. So yeah, if they can do what they want, That's really up to them what they do. Similarly with students working nights, I really worry about the 24-hour availability, not because I don't think they should be allowed to have it. It's just that I worry that we are setting an expectation that students should be studying all night and all hours. I think that's a bad example, and to be able to support students in managing their time so that they're not necessarily working all that time, or are certainly getting enough rest in the day. That always worries me as well when I see them, because being a student can be a very stressful thing.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think it's a valid point with the amount of hours that students work, and then the staff point. But I think this kind of relates into our first topic, which is gender. And I thought it would be kind of interesting to look at, because I came from an events management degree. So I was one of 2 males in 20 females in my class. It was maybe more than that. It was a lot anyway.
You were underrepresented in your discipline.
We were underrepresented. I remember my mates and all that must be brilliant. But it was tough. It was tough at times, because obviously. They had their own opinions. I have my own opinions, but I didn't ever feel that because I was one of 2 guys that my opinions weren't heard. But I was interested to see if you felt that was kind of the same from your school or other schools.
In the discipline itself, I don't think it is the same, unfortunately. And I observe, and it's not just in our school, certainly it's in engineering in its entirety, because I follow enough people on Twitter to see that there's still an issue here. So I have seen that unless women students are particularly forthright, oftentimes their voice is not represented or acknowledged as valid, or as valid as the guy's opinion. And that's not in all cases, but I have seen that quite a few times, enough for us to be very mindful when we set groups together in the early stages. We like to make sure that there are at least 2 women in a group. So that because we've seen a lot of studies to suggest that certainly in engineering, if there is 50% representation of women in a group, the whole group does better. So it's not just the women getting a better grade, the whole group does better. And if there are fewer than 50% or less than 50%, the guys still do the same, but the women do worse. So that's why we try to be mindful of that, without being patronising, say you're going to go in 2s because you need to speak louder. It's not so much that. We try and mindfully group people wherever possible. Sometimes that doesn't look like it's needed, but other times certainly I see that the women in the team are given the admin tasks to do. So, we'll build this thing and you do the poster, love. And I do struggle with that. So we try and ease that out of them as soon as possible. But yeah, I think still there is some issues there. I don't think it's as bad potentially, and there's lots of support groups, and there's a kind of mentoring sisterhood, if you will, to try and mitigate for some of that. But I think certainly in the discipline it's still very much evident, and there's only so much one person can do.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, isn't it? Because it'll be different across all the schools as well. So, yeah. For example, at your school, there's obviously more males than female, but there's other schools.
94%, something like that.
Yeah. Other schools, it could be the flip side the other way. So it could be there's more girls than guys. So I think it's an interesting one, and it's maybe one that we need to look into more, and kind of find ways of, right at the start, how do we kind of make the groups into ways that are going to be effective, and that somebody always makes sure that their beliefs and values are heard. But at the same time, I remember being in a group and sometimes people wouldn't even listen. So it was a leader wouldn't even listen to somebody's views, and that's obviously just their tolerance levels are different. But it's important that we get students to understand that just because little Tom over there isn't saying much, he might have the best idea, and he might
exactly.
Yeah,
he might just be daydreaming. That's the thing, you don't always know.
You might be bored of all your ideas. That's it. And I think that's important as we go through. But and it's interesting from a sports side. I mean, I don't want to go too much into the sports side, but we've actually seen it's not really a problem from our leader point of view. We probably have more female leaders in clubs than males, and I know in forums that it's very, very even between the females being just as vocal, probably sometimes more vocal than the males, which was interesting for me to see because I kind of thought it wouldn't be the case, but it's interesting to hear from the engineering side of things that it may still it kind of is a problem. So.
Yeah, I think it's again it's progressed from years gone by, but there are still people who it's in industries, and there's certainly people who still get asked to make the tea when they come in when actually they're the lead engineer. So, and again, there's tolerance on both sides, because you kind of think, well, okay, I realise you have made this assumption, and I will give you an opportunity to quickly remedy this and see where it goes from there. But yeah, I think there's definitely a lot we could do. I mean, I'm fascinated by engineers. Anyway, that's my PhD topic, is looking at mental well-being of engineering students. So I'm delving really quite deeply into what it is an engineer, how does an engineer think? And actually it's not about male thinking or anything like that. There are specific, it's process driven. Anyone can be an engineer who wants to be essentially an engineer. And yes, there's some hard work to do, but there's a kind of, at the moment, still a general acceptance that engineering is a man's game, and that is something we've still to overcome, I think.
Yeah, and actually, I've just had a question come in. It's kind of taking us off guard. But obviously, you've been talking about kind of your experience and seeing it from the outside looking in. But have you kind of? It must have been a little bit tricky for you as well at times, is it?
Yes, because I'm a geologist as well. So I'm not even an engineer.
So what kind of advice would you give to anyone, whether it's female or male, in their course, where they feel they maybe are a little outnumbered, or how do we feel that? What's your advice?
If you're not in the included group, as it were, I think it can be really challenging. Sometimes you're seen as special, and you must be like, certainly in engineering, if you're a woman, people outside of engineering, oh wow, you must be super clever. You don't have to be, and I'm sure they are, but you don't have to be that clever. Yeah, there's definitely a perception there. As a geologist and as a woman coming into an engineering school, there have been assumptions that I'm not as serious about my work, because as a geologist I take a very big view of the world. Like, it really doesn't matter in 100 years, we'll all be dead. That's what, there's a different worldview from geologists than engineers. Our margin of errors are huge in comparison to engineers, and so I did get one time, and he has since left, but Jo, she can't even do maths. And so that invalidated any of my arguments, because I wasn't able to do some hard sums. And that's, I couldn't do the hard sums, I'll admit. I do find sometimes early on that the people in my peer group didn't always take me as seriously. And the way that I dealt with that, I learned for a start is that the people I was working with are evidence-based. They want to see facts. They don't want to see gut feeling. And so when I would come in with my gut feeling and they weren't accepting it, I first of all would get upset that they weren't understanding my huge vision. But when I realized what they wanted was some numbers, I went and got the numbers. And I did some sums, and I got someone to check, because that's what you do. And then when I presented them with the evidence that my idea actually would be beneficial, then it was accepted. So there was a kind of movement on both sides there. I think if you're feeling lonely or you feel isolated in your group, you do need to reach out to others like yourself. So we've begun a women's group in the School of Engineering for those who would like to be part of that. It's very early days. Some are feeling very comfortable to do that and some are not. But we're also looking at providing mentoring of women engineers out in industry so that they have someone to share their own experiences with. Because I think that does help. If you realise you are not actually that alone, they can help you with tools that you can use yourself. Because I could just apply a bunch of, here, do all these things and everything will be fine. Yeah. Might not. So it really has to fit the person for what they need. But certainly, if there's anybody in the school, in my school, if they do feel like that, please come forward and we can do something for sure if there is anybody listening in that position. But yes, getting together with others is a good start.
Yeah, no, good answer. And thanks for that question as well. And if anyone has any more questions, please keep firing them in. But I want to link back again to Emmanuel's talk last week, where he talked about cultural miscommunication. And I think this kind of links quite well. It could link quite well to age groups, which is kind of our next topic. And I think for me, it's kind of interesting because obviously we see loads of different age groups as a university, but they all speak differently to each other.
Yes.
From my view, being president of sport and physical activity, there's presidents that are older than me, there's presidents that are a lot younger than me. Yeah. I found it quite tricky to understand what their beliefs were, how they spoke, and I would speak probably have to have about 6 or 7 different personalities that day just to speak to the different people. And I wondered if that was kind of the same for you, or do you see that maybe different ages maybe don't respect the younger ones, or do you feel the younger ones listen to the older age groups? Because you have a lot of mature students as well. We've
got mature students. We have certainly in our fairly recent history, we have a lot of students from Nigeria. We had a lot of students from China in our postgraduate courses. So there was various agreements that went on to allow for big groups of people coming from different countries. Age group wise, it is pretty wide, but the majority are sort of 18 to 25-year-old. In our staff membership, we have people from, I did a count at one point, I think it's 15 or 16 different countries, and right across the age groups, from just graduated with their PhD to, maybe thinking about retirement, that kind of right across. So there are lots of different ways to be offended. I think that would be an easy way to put it. But there's lots of scope for opportunity from the different viewpoints. I'll a quick story about one of a student reps from years ago, and they were brilliant. They were a really good rep. But we had started to introduce them chairing meetings, and they were maybe early 20s, I would say, and we had people right across the age group in the meeting. And they, instead of saying next item, or I think we all agree with that, they would just say sick. And I was kind of, okay. And the first kind of couple of times it happened, I thought, okay, are you sick? Are you feeling? We weren't really sure if they were feeling sick. And certainly the older people, you could see the faces of like, what's happening? Is someone going to be ill? And it really was that kind of, it's just the use of the word was not familiar to us, and it would normally for us that would not be an acceptable thing to say in a meeting.
Yeah.
But actually in the real world it probably isn't such a big deal. But I do remember the blank faces of academics around the rooms, like what? But then we realised, we remembered that the person taking the meeting had never taken a meeting before. They're brand new to all of this, and all of that stuff they're going to learn. And they weren't being offensive in any way. It was just extremely informal. So that was, I do still remember that of the first time. It's like, oh my goodness, I'm so old now.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? From the fact that when you get new students in, that They maybe don't know what's going on, and they maybe don't know the staff yet. And I think it's important for the staff to realise where they've come from as well, and that they're going to speak totally different language to what they are. It's like
worldview and expectations, for sure. And when I was talking about students who are coming over from far-flung places, the different expectations of writing are things that we didn't, in our very early days, we didn't really appreciate or understand in any way. So for a while, a good deal of our students from Nigeria and China were coming up and getting in trouble for plagiarism and all sorts. And it took us a while to figure out that they'd never really been taught UK academic writing. And it sounds ridiculous now, but at the time, I was receiving these and going, oh, for crying out loud, what's happening here? And actually, it wasn't a deliberate attempt to thwart my coursework in any sense at all. It was just a pure lack of knowledge on their part, because we'd never even thought to introduce it to them. So when we did this whole thing about academic writing and referencing, and we did quizzes and practices, and suddenly that whole problem just went away. So that was a big example of us as a nominally white university in the north of Scotland just not understanding that the way academia is done in other places is not the same. And it sounds ridiculous saying it now, but at the time it was, all right, okay, that's fine then.
Yeah, and again, that comes back to the definition and the fact that it's kind of accepting that their opinions and values are going to be different, aren't they? I think one story that I have that's kind of interesting, and it kind of took me off guard, was obviously I'm only 23, so I'm quite on the young age of the spectrum, and I was in a meeting, quite an important meeting, and there was two people senior to me, and they were older, but the person that was meeting us came in, and he was kind of younger as well, so to the first person, older person, he said, "Good morning, how are you?" To the next person, he said, "Good morning, how are you?" And to me, he shook my hand and said, "All right, mate, how you doing?"
Oh, okay.
And in that situation, you kind of think, what goes on there? Because he should have treated me exactly the same as he treated.
Yeah. Oh, that's
the exact same thing, but he didn't. And I don't know if that was because I was younger and he could relate to it more. But I think that's where the understanding then comes in from a student point of view, that you've got to understand your surrounding, and no matter what age the person is, like, you've got to act in the same way, and I think that comes at the start.
You're right. I think I'm trying to think, like, in my head, I'm like, did they have suits on? What was going on there? And I think there is a tendency for some academic staff to try to be more informal with people who are clearly students, which is fine, but we have staff who really look like they are clearly students as well. So that can be quite bad in meetings when people try and treat people a different way. I think if there are kind of accepted settings and accepted approaches, that's useful, but it doesn't always work for everybody. And that's where that tolerance comes in, so some people in a meeting may talk over me, and I will wait for my opportunity to express whatever I needed to express. If they continued to do it, I would make note of it and say, thank you for that. I wouldn't necessarily be rude about it, but I would say, I have noticed that you are talking over me, and I'm going to continue to do this way until you cease and desist. It doesn't always happen, but from time to time, it's useful to be able to know your own strength as well, and not be put off by other people's shtick or whatever it is they're doing, and so that you can make sure that you're heard. And if people need help with that, again, sometimes it's not an easy thing to learn. It can take a long time. So I think it's definitely a skill that we could help with, for sure.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, we could talk about this for days, but unfortunately we're coming to the end, so I'll kind of start to wrap up. But I think it's important to kind of round off on the fact that this is just our views.
Absolutely.
Right, it's our stories. And obviously, if any out there has any opinions, please send them in after as well, because this is how we're kind of shaping the partnership objective. We want it to be both staff and students involved and get both their sides. But interestingly, I read Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of bring the last piece in the fact that the dignity at work study policy. Mm-hmm. So it's something that I read, I think, at the start of my job, but it was kind of tough to kind of get into it and really realise what it was. But then when I reread it a couple of weeks ago, it makes so much sense. And I can imagine there's a lot of students and staff out there that don't even know it exists or read it.
They should read that.
I would definitely point them towards it. It has loads of advice, a lot of areas that we've talked about. It kind of talks about it in detail, where you can go for help and kind of advice where you can go from there. So if you haven't, I would advise. Have you read it, Jo?
I have read it. I've had, for a number of reasons, I've read it. Firstly, because Phil sent it to me and said, read this. So I do what I'm told. But also, I think it is helpful because, you know, it's when we say university, yes, students are learning and they're getting degrees and we're teaching them stuff, but actually the university is a place of work for people like myself. So if I am finding that I am being treated badly, or I feel I'm being treated badly or being discriminated against, these policies are vital for me to rely on to ensure that that we're all being treated respectfully in the way that we would hope to treat others. Having a policy like that kind of really is very clear about what is and what is not acceptable. It gives you a place to start from if you want to challenge someone's behaviour. So yes, I have read it and I've used it on a couple of occasions as well. And I've shared it with others who maybe feel that they are not being treated as well as they might like. And so to look at this this is the bottom line of things you should expect from a workplace. So yeah, read it.
Yeah. And I think just to wrap up, we've obviously kind of touched on age, gender, but there's obviously a few more topics out there. And Ursula is going to be live from 2 p.m. So please make sure you tune in for that. It's on the same site as this one was. And she's going to be discussing respect, and also in relation to other topics such as sexuality, faith, and religion. And I think it's important that we kind of stress, although we focused on gender and age, I mean, tolerance relates to all those areas as well. And if we had time, we could have spoke for days about them too.
Yeah, I'll come back, you know.
Take us back live if we haven't messed this one up too much. But Jo, I'd like to thank you for your time. It's been very interesting. Thanks to everyone who sent in questions and to everyone that's watched it. And I hope that you've learned something from this. Thank you very much.
Cheers.